Hello everyone! Now that Chaos Impact is here, it's time to talk about the latest support available to one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most endearing, fan-favorite archetypes. No, not that one. Nope, keep going. Almost there. Okay, now you're just screwing with me. Come on, let me do a little adjusting here, and... voila! Yes, today is all about Aromages. We'll be going over the previous harvests to get everyone up to speed, farm the new arrivals to see how they complement the current cornucopia of Kale-adjacent critters, and check our almanacs to see what's in store for them. Let's start by going over their similarities. All of the Aromages are plant-type monsters, and most of them have at least two effects. A continuous one that's applied whenever you have higher life points than your opponent, and a trigger effect that goes off once per turn when you gain life points. This is the big reason to play the deck. See, when it comes to competitive level Yu-Gi-Oh!, a phrase that you'll often hear in some form or another is, the only life point that matters is the last one. And yeah, that's pretty much true. We don't really have any decks that win you the game if your life points are at a certain total, so while there may be edge cases where you gained just enough life points to avoid losing, most of the time you just end up using your card economy to not advance your game plan. However, Aromages flip the script. If played in the correct sequence, life point gain can trigger various effects, ranging from battle position manipulation to card draw. Now that we have that in mind, let's go over the lineup. We'll be starting with Aromages, partly because I want to be as comprehensive as possible, but mostly because I just want to get it out of the way. Technically a part of the archetype, as most effects that name drop the theme check for aroma monsters, Aromages is a wind attribute rock type flip monster with no actual flip effect. It can't be destroyed by battle if it was flipped face up, and gives you 500 life points during either player's end phase. Honestly, there's nothing good I can say about this card. Its life point gain is too slow to be of use in any proactive strategy, and in other regards it's a total disconnect from the archetype. If it wasn't part of the aroma theme, I doubt anyone would even bother. Aromage Jasmine, on the other hand, is an absolutely incredible card that you always want to be seeing. If you have the advantage in life points, you gain an extra normal summon of a plant monster, extremely useful for mobilizing your botanical brutes. It also draws you a card once per turn when you gain life points. But the doozy is that it's not a hard once per turn, meaning multiple Jasmines means multiple draws. All of a sudden, Diane Keto is an upstart goblin, but you're the one gaining life points. Disclaimer, GoldenNova does not condone the usage of Diane Keto in any deck. Yes, even Aromages. This also goes for cards like Red Medicine, Blue Medicine, and Goblin Cure. If your main phase is lasting for more than 4 hours after using Goblin Cure, please cease dueling and call your head judge. Aromage Kananga's 1400 attack stat may seem lousy, but if you have the higher life points, it actually debuffs all of your opponent's monsters by 500 attack and defense, making it that much easier to run over big beatsticks. And while that effect is taking care of things on the monster front, Kananga can bounce one spell or trap your opponent controls when you gain life points. While it's not actually taking cards away from your opponent, it does force a reaction from them. Bouncing a floodgate they had planned to use to keep you down isn't likely to help them much if they have to wait a couple extra turns to deploy it again. And if you manage to hit the set counter trap, they'll either have to trade with Kananga or be forced to keep the card for later, but have less interaction immediately. And much like Jasmine, it's not a hard once per turn among copies, so a cluster of Kananga means more stat debuffs and more back row badgering. Aromage Rosemary makes all of your plant monsters, not just Aromages, into pseudo Armades while you have higher life points, keeping your opponent from activating any monster effects from attack declaration until the end of the damage step. Rosemary also changes the battle position of one monster on the field whenever you gain life points. This is not an ability that has aged well, especially since it's mandatory. Position changing had some cute interactions when it first came out, essentially being able to negate attacks or make a monster more vulnerable to attacks, but now with link monsters being at the forefront of most decks, it's not very reliable. Nowadays all it's good for is changing Jasmine to defense position after using your extra normal summon on Rosemary, but at least her attack stat's pretty good. Aromage Bergamot is one of the deck's main ways of pushing out damage, and it is not shy about that. While you have higher life points, all of your plants gain piercing, which is, nice every once in a while. But when you gain life points once per turn, it gains 1,000 attack and defense, putting it at 3,400 attack. If you need something gone, Bergamot can flatten it. but it does come at the cost of it being a level 6 monster, and as it turns out, Aromages don't really have good ways of fielding their heftier threats, relying on outside plant support to do that for them. It does pack a big punch, but in today's meta, can you justify running a battle-oriented monster that doesn't do really unfair things like Borrelsword Dragon? Now, one might be wondering, in a theme that's all about gaining life points, there haven't really been any effects that do that for you. And that's where Aroma Garden comes in. This field spell lets you gain 500 life points once per turn as long as you control an aroma monster, on top of giving you a nice 500 attack and defense boost to every monster you control until the end of your opponent's next turn, even if it leaves the field. That is a very nice bonus, especially considering the mediocre stat line of many of the Aromages, but the fact that it applies to everything means that any monster you pull out of the extra deck that you are going to use anyway become that much more powerful. It's a real shame that it's an ignition effect tied to having an aroma monster on the board, so it can essentially be negated by monster removal. But that's where its second effect comes in. Anytime one of your aromas are destroyed by battle or card effect while face up on the field, you gain 1,000 life points. Since it's a trigger, it's not going to be very useful for getting your effects off the ground when you need them, but I like to think of it as more of a way to keep your life points topped off to keep your continuous effects online. Next on the list is Humid Winds, a continuous trap that's probably the most important card in the whole deck. Once per turn, by paying 1,000 life points, you can add any aroma monster from your deck to your hand. Because it's a trap, you can even search during your opponent's turn as well as your own. So as long as this card's going strong, you're always going to have an aroma monster to work with. But GoldenNova, I hear you decry, an eyebrow arched critically in disgust. How can you claim that a card that costs 1/8 of your life points every time you activate it to be important in a deck that requires you to have as many life points as possible? To which I would say, hey, good job on paying attention, thank you for your time. Followed up by an explanation of Humid Wind's second effect, which gains you 500 life points once per turn as long as you have lower life points than your opponent. So, by lowering your life points to search, you open up the opportunity to gain those life points back, as well as having a card that activates all of your life point gain effects during your opponent's turn. Now you have the opportunity to bounce powerful trap cards that turn their set using Kananga, instead of having to wait for your turn to roll around. Or heck, even draw cards during your opponent's turn with Jasmine to get that hand trap that you needed. True, the designers could have just let you gain the life points without having to lose your continuous effects, but thankfully we'll have even better options later on. The last card of the Clash of Rebellion Aromages is Dried Winds, which has its own trigger effect upon gaining life points. In this case, it targets a face-up monster your opponent controls and destroys it. The effect is pretty limiting, what with the monster having to be face-up, and it only targeting monsters, and the fact that it targets and destroys, which is becoming less and less of an effective way of removing cards these days. But it is still a free pop, and combos very well with Humid Winds. And if you want to go for broke, its second effect can cash in all of your life point gain, as well as any offensive pressure, into a pseudo Raigeki. Whenever your life points are at least 3,000 higher than your opponent's, you can pay life points until you and your opponent have the same amount, and then you get to destroy as many monsters they control as possible, provided that their combined attack value is less than or equal to the amount of life points that you paid, and that is really bad. Like, if I'm being honest, having to pay at least 3,000 for maybe destroying some cards is super pricey, but it is nice to have the option just in case. I mean, it outs Avermax, am I right? Wait, IP Masquerena does what? And that's pretty much where Aromages were at for a while. The only real win condition the deck had was to use Aroma Garden in conjunction with its main deck monsters, no not that one, to facilitate a beatdown strategy that tied some pretty good effects to life point triggers, but none of which involved building a field quickly to capitalize on big damage. You could search as much as you wanted with Humid Winds, but Jasmine's extra normal summon was the only way to get extra plants onto the board. You had to rely on cards like Lone Fire Blossom to get around Bergamot's Tribute, and cards like Miracle Fertilizer basically non-bowed with Jasmine, so yeah, not a lot of buzz for the plant archetype that focused more on flower power than adhering to any pre-existing plant support. Fast forward to more than a year later, we have the release of Metal Gear Solid Invasion Revengeance, the debut set of everyone's favorite Super Poly enabler. We've got 2 new additions to the team, and Doth mine eyes deceive me? Nay, 'tis a plant monster that's also a tuner. The spirit of Akiza lives on. Praise be to the Rose Garden. This tuner comes in the form of Aromaseraphy Angelica, who's almost as important as Humid Winds is. As a quick effect, you can discard her and target one aroma monster in your graveyard, giving you life points equal to the targeted monster's attack. The amount you gain can be helpful for getting your continuous effects online, but the more important thing is that it triggers all of your life point gain effects at almost any time on your terms. It's even searchable during your opponent's turn if you use Humid Winds, where you can leverage its ability almost immediately. And should you end up having higher life points, you can leverage Angelica's second effect. Should you have higher life points and control an aroma monster, you can summon Angelica out of the grave, but it gets banished if it leaves the field after that. While the revival effect does have a few hoops to jump through, it doesn't lock you into any particular summons, so not only can you use it to synchro summon, but also as link material, which will become super relevant later on. All in all, a pretty thematic tuner for the archetype, but still comparatively slow. The fact that you already need an Aromage in the grave to get the life point gain means that you need to find a way to yard an Aromage early on, but the deck has no specific way of doing that, at least not when it came out. To go along with the tuner, we get a synchro monster, Aromaseraphy Rosemary. I like how it's completely generic, but it has just the right level to be made out of Rosemary and Angelica. I love it when card art gives you little hints on interactions. While your life points are higher, all of your plant monsters gain 500 attack and defense, so it's a nice complement to Kananga. Also, its life point gain effect lets you target one face-up card your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. I like that it doesn't just hit monsters, but can also shut off spells and traps, giving you the ability to turn off floodgates as well as problematic monsters. Unfortunately, because it triggers off of life point gain, it's a very limited version of Spicy Boy Archfiend. It can stop more static threats, but won't be able to stop anything that's not going to stick to the field. Still, it is nice to have a monster that not only helps facilitate the beatdown strategy the deck has, but also helps you play through some problematic cards. Things would get quiet for a while after that, the new additions not changing things up enough to garner play. The first Link Vrains pack revealed Aromaseraphy Jasmine, but she wouldn't show up in the TCG for another 2.5 years after the last wave of support. But it was well worth the wait. This helpful Link 2 let you tribute any monster that it pointed to summon any plant monster from your deck, effectively turning any monster into Lonefire Blossom. It also gives itself and any plant monster it points to immunity to battle destruction as long as you have higher life points, and lets you add a plant monster from your deck to your hand when you gain life points once per turn. Because this version of Jasmine only needs plants as link material, now you can effectively draw on some of the game's best plant support to accelerate the strategy, and because of her searching, you'll hardly ever be short of the monsters that you need. Heck, while the special summoning effect is a hard once per turn, the search effect is once per turn per copy, which is kind of ridiculous. So, that brings us to the present day. Chaos Impact. Up to this point, the deck is still in dire need of a proper win condition that goes beyond just punching the heck out of your opponent, as well as more ways to gain life points in theme, and man, it does not disappoint. Let's start with Aromage Laurel. While you have higher life points than your opponent, you can just special summon them right out of your hand. When you gain life points, you can treat a non-tuner plant as a tuner for the rest of the turn, even himself. This means that you have another pseudo-tuner that's even better than Angelica in certain circumstances. Also, when they're sent to the grave, you can just gain 500 life points. Not only is this another way to gain life points, but it can trigger off of being used as material, so you can immediately negate a card with Seraphy Rosemary, or search with Seraphy Jasmine. Next we have Aromage Marjoram. While you have higher life points, you don't take battle damage from any battle involving your plant monsters, which helps you keep your life points topped off when your opponent just wants to beat them out of you. She is level 5, but unlike Bergamot, she has a way to special summon herself from the hand. I mean, sure, a plant monster that you control has to be destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, but hey, it's better than nothing. Heck, it even gains you 500 life points in the process, which ends up triggering her own effect, letting you banish cards out of your opponent's grave equal to the number of aroma monsters you control. Its usefulness is pretty situational, but it's still a good thing to have in your main engine in grave-reliant metagames. Before we get to the deck's new, and arguably only boss monster, let's go over the rest of the support that was released. Aroma Gardening is absolutely bonkers. It gives you 1,000 life points when you normal or special summon an aroma monster once per turn. Admittedly, not a great combo with Rosemary, but it's fantastic everywhere else. Jasmine immediately gives you a draw and potentially turns on your extra normal summon. Kananga's debuff is almost certainly going to be active, and if you're going second, you can just bounce a card. If Laurel is in your hand, you probably just met the conditions to special summon it. And if that wasn't enough, it gives you a rudimentary form of battle defense. If your opponent attacks you while your life points are lower, you can summon any aroma monster from your deck, which will, in turn, trigger the life point gain of Aroma Gardening. If that attacking monster is not a link, Rosemary can just negate the attack by turning it sideways. Or Kananga can show up, and if your life point gain puts you above your opponent, the attack debuff could potentially put them in a sticky situation. Next is Blessed Winds, another in the line of wind continuous trap cards. It lets you choose one of 3 effects, but you can't activate multiple per turn like humid or dry winds can. However, there is a lot of flexibility in what they can do for you. 2 of the effects give you 500 life points. One activates by sending a plant monster from your hand or face up on your field to the graveyard, and the second by shuffling a plant from your grave into your deck. The third effect lets you summon any aroma monster from your grave by paying 1,000 life points. And this is just strictly good. Like, it's a shame that it's got a hard once per turn, so you can't chain a bunch of the abilities together, but it does so much for the deck. Having another way to gain life points repeatably at spell speed 2 means that you can activate your aroma triggers during your opponent's turn more reliably, and being able to revive impactful aromas from the grave will let you recover from devastating setbacks. Lastly, let's turn our gaze to the latest member of the game, Aromaseraphie Sweet Marjoram. Once again, its level means that you can make it out of marjoram and angelica for a sweet flavor win, but it also adds any of the wind continuous traps from your deck to your hand, either dry, humid, or blessed. This is outstanding because now you can play less humid winds in your main deck, which is a very strong card, but it does break in multiples. If you have higher life points, all of your plant monsters become immune to targeting from your opponent's card effects. This is probably the most important continuous effect that we've seen from the archetype to date. While recent card design has a lot of effects that just avoid targeting, this does keep our monsters safe from interruptions like Mind Control, Compulsory Evacuation Device, and Infinite Impermanence. And if that wasn't enough, Sweet Marjoram destroys one card your opponent controls once per turn when you gain life points. And it doesn't even have any of the restrictions that Dried Wind has, so you can just completely skip playing that card. That catches us up with all the Aromages releases up to this point, but what other support cards can we use to help boost the power of this strategy? Spore and Glow Up Bulb are obvious inclusions. If their level isn't helpful for making synchro monsters, then they're just easy link material. Evil Thorn is actually a 1-card Aromaseraphie Jasmine that also puts you at higher life points. If you're going first, resolving the effect will not only get you the 2 monsters necessary for the link, it also burns your opponent for 300. You also have the option to go into Sylvan Princess Sprite to grab a free card off the top of your deck. Cauldron of the Old Man will give you life points during your turn whenever you need it, so it acts as a less powerful Aroma Garden, which you're going to need with Terraforming Limited. The interesting thing about it is that because you can choose to damage your opponent instead of gaining life points, and it gains more counters to amplify this ability during each of your standby phases, it kind of has a wave motion cannon vibe to it. If your opponent doesn't respect it, they may find that you had lethal damage using this intoxicating brew. The same can be said for Poison of the Old Man. Its life point gain and burn damage are more potent, and its quick play status means that it can pull some of the same kind of shenanigans as Angelica can, but it is a one-off, so you will have to use it wisely. Lone Fire Blossom is just an automatic include, it's just so good. And cards like Monster Reborn and World Legacy Succession can bring it back to summon even more. Ancient Sacred Wyvern can actually be made in this deck if you use Laurel's Tuner effect. By turning Sweet Marjoram into a tuner, her and Laurel can make the oddly fairy-typed monster. Or you can just use Angelica and Sweet Marjoram, your pick. Wyvern gains attack for how many more life points you have than your opponent, and it loses attack for how much you have less. Its revival effect isn't likely to be of much use, but the fact that all of your life point gaining can actually translate into big damage, especially if you wait to attack with it last, means that it will be a great tool to end games. So, With all of that on the table, what kind of deck do we have exactly? Well, I'm confident in saying that we're still playing a beatdown strategy, but now we don't have to rush for OTKs to avoid dealing with the consequences of playing a glass cannon. Or should I say, a grass cannon. Monsters like Aromaseraphy Jasmine and Sweet Marjoram give us the options to build up a defensible board in case we're made to go first, and those same cards can be used to break boards going second, with cards like Aroma Gardening and Blessed Winds used to help stabilize things in case games go sideways. As long as we have abilities to trigger life point gain at will, we essentially have quick effects that can remove cards, give us draws, and negate effects. I'd go with something like this. I would hazard against trying to pilot this at your next premier event, but if your locals doesn't have a huge competitive scene, I think you'll be pleased with the board you can build. A cool interaction that I found in testing is that if you search Laurel with Seraphy Jasmine's effect and you still have higher life points, you can summon Laurel to one of her zones, tribute them to summon regular Jasmine, and then Laurel's life point gain trigger activates, immediately giving you a draw. But this is just a starting point. I want to see what you all can come up with as well. I wasn't playing a lot during Plant Synchro era, so I don't have a lot of muscle memory on the kinds of things that you can do, so I'm sure there's a ton of room for improvement. And if you'd like to grab these cards to experiment in paper, you can do so using my new TCG Player affiliate link, found in a video description near you. Yes, you too can now support your favorite goofy gamer whenever you buy singles, should you feel so inclined. But enough about my shilling. I want to hear what you all have to say about these aromatic aces. Is there potential just beneath the topsoil? Or are we just trying to till arid acres? Thank you all so very much, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.